On the morning of December 7th, 1941, a 21-year-old ensign from Oklahoma died inside an upside-down battleship at Pearl Harbor. His name was John Charles England. 3 years later, a small ship carrying his name would sail into the Pacific and do something no vessel had ever done before, and none has ever done since. In 12 days, she would sink 6 Japanese submarines. Alone. This is how one young man's death was answered, and how that answer helped end an empire. The Pacific Ocean, in the spring of 1944, kept its secrets well. 200 feet below the surface, where sunlight faded into perpetual green twilight, a Japanese fleet submarine cruised at patrol depth. Her name was I-16. Inside her pressure hull, the air was thick with the smell of diesel oil, sweat, and the faint metallic tang that comes from breathing recycled atmosphere for too many days in a row. 107 men lived inside that steel tube. They spoke in low voices when they spoke at all. They slept in shifts, ate in shifts, stood watch in shifts. Above them lay hundreds of feet of open ocean, and beyond that, an enemy who did not know they existed. That was what they believed. That was what their commander, Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka, had been told. His routing was classified. His communications were encoded in the naval cipher the Imperial Japanese Navy considered unbreakable. His mission was routine. He was a submarine commander of the 6th Fleet, and he had every reason to trust the darkness around him. But on the other side of the Pacific, in a basement facility beneath Pearl Harbor, men in shirt sleeves were reading his mail. Oh, they called the place FRUPAC, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. It was one of the most closely guarded operations of the Second World War. A room full of cryptanalysts and linguists and traffic analysts who had spent years dismantling the Imperial Japanese Navy's communications from the inside. By 1944, they were reading Japanese naval signals almost as fast as those signals could be transmitted. They knew where the submarines were going. They knew when, they knew why, and in the middle of May, they intercepted a message that would set in motion the most extraordinary killing streak in the history of naval warfare. But before that message, before the ships, before the ocean gave up its dead, there was a young man from Oklahoma. His name was John Charles England. He was 21 years old on the morning of December 7th, 1941. An ensign, freshly commissioned, serving aboard the battleship USS Oklahoma, moored on Battleship Row at Ford Island, Pearl Harbor. He had done nothing particularly remarkable in his short life. He had grown up in a small town, gone to school, taken the oath, put on the uniform. His parents were proud of him in the ordinary way that parents are proud of their sons. Oh, he had a future ahead of him, and he expected to see it. At 7:55 that morning, the first wave of Japanese carrier aircraft came in low over the harbor. Kate torpedo bombers from the fleet carriers Akagi and Kaga banked hard and lined up on the row of American battleships. The Oklahoma took her first torpedo hit within the opening minutes, then a second, then a third, then more, until the number no longer mattered. She listed, she groaned, and then she rolled. The Oklahoma capsized in less than 12 minutes, her hull turning almost completely upside down in the shallow water. 429 men died inside her that morning. Some drowned in trapped compartments. Some suffocated in air pockets. Over the hours and days that followed, tapping on the hull as rescuers on the outside worked frantically and eventually silently stopped hearing them. Ensign John C. England was one of those men. He did not survive. The Navy would list him among the dead of Pearl Harbor. In time, they would name a ship after him. That ship would carry his name into waters he never saw, and it would do things in his memory that no one, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, could have imagined. She was hull number DE 635. She was built at the Bethlehem Shipbuilding Corporation Yard in San Francisco, California, launched on September 26, 1943. Commissioned on December 10th of the same year, 3 days after the second anniversary of the attack that had given her name. A Buckley-class destroyer Escort, a little over 300 feet long, 1,400 tons, 186 men aboard. She was not glamorous. She would never make the headlines that battleships and fleet carriers made. Destroyer escorts were the workhorses of the war, the small, cheap, mass-produced vessels the United States churned out by the hundreds to guard convoys and hunt submarines across 2 oceans, where a Fletcher-class destroyer stretched to 376 feet and displaced over 2,000 tons. The England was smaller, slower, more lightly armed. She carried fewer guns. She had fewer torpedo tubes. She was, by every measure the surface fleet used to measure prestige, a lesser ship. But what she carried on her bow was something new. Her commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander Walter B. Pendleton, a career officer, methodical, patient, unremarkable in the way that the most effective naval officers often were. He did not seek attention. He drilled his crew. He drilled them until the drills became reflex, until the reflex became something deeper than training, something that lived below thought. His executive officer was Lieutenant John A. Williamson. Together, they took their new ship out into the Pacific, through Pearl Harbor, through Funafuti, through Guadalcanal, and finally to Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. Through the early months of 1944, the England did unglamorous work. She escorted supply convoys. She screened transports. She ran the shipping lanes that kept the American advance across the South Pacific fed and armed and moving forward. And every day, in every quiet hour between escort runs, Pendleton trained his men on the weapon bolted to the deck forward of the bridge. They called it the Hedgehog. It was a British invention, designed by a group of unconventional engineers at the Royal Navy's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a team so eccentric that the Admiralty had given them the nickname the Wheezers and Dodgers. The Hedgehog had entered British service in 1942, and by the following year, it was being installed on American escort vessels under reverse lend-lease. To understand what the Hedgehog did, you have to understand what it replaced. The standard anti-submarine weapon of the Second World War was the depth charge, a canister of high explosive set to detonate at a pre-selected depth, rolled off the stern of an attacking ship as it passed over the estimated position of a submerged target. It was a blunt instrument. It relied on volume, on saturation, on the hope that enough charges scattered in the right general area would rupture the pressure hull below. The problem was geometry. As a ship accelerated toward its target, its sonar, the acoustic system that tracked submarines by the echo of a projected sound pulse, lost contact in the final seconds of the attack run. There was a blind zone directly beneath and just ahead of the attacking vessel. In those seconds, the submarine below became invisible, and a skilled Japanese commander, one who knew his boat, could use that blind window to turn hard, change depth, and slip clear of the falling charges. Then the charges detonated, and the ocean itself became noise. The underwater shock waves churned the water so violently that sonar contact was lost, not for seconds, but for 10, 15 minutes at a time. The submarine could run in any direction. By the time the Escort regained contact, if it ever did, the target was often gone. The numbers told the story. One submarine sunk for every 60 depth charge attacks, a ratio that had frustrated Allied anti-submarine warfare from the first days of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Hedgehog turned the problem inside out. Instead of rolling charges off the stern after passing the target, it fired forward. 24 contact-fused spigot mortar bombs launched in an elliptical pattern, approximately 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. And here was the essential difference, the detail that changed everything. The bombs only exploded if they physically struck something solid. If the salvo missed, there was silence. No churn, no shockwave, no blindness. The sonar contact remained clean. The attacking ship could circle, reacquire, and attack again. And if a single bomb, just one, found the hull of a submarine below, 35 pounds of Torpex, a mixture of RDX, TNT, and powdered aluminum, punched a hole 3 to 4 inches wide through hardened steel. At depth, water flooded in at 400 gallons a minute. There was no stopping it. The submarine lost depth control. She sank. The flooding accelerated. The pressure hull crushed. The kill ratio climbed. One submarine sunk for every 5 or 6 Hedgehog attacks, 10 times more efficient than the weapon it replaced. Pendleton had trained his crew on this weapon until They no longer had to think about it. Sonar bearing, range, depth estimate, fire control solution, salvo, reload. Sonar bearing, it became a rhythm. It became a language they spoke without words. They did not know it yet, but they were about to speak that language 6 times in 12 days. In the middle of May, in that basement facility beneath Pearl Harbor, the cryptanalysts of FRUPAC intercepted the routing orders for a Japanese submarine. Her name was I-16. She was a Type C1 fleet submarine, a veteran of 9 war patrols. In 1942, she had carried one of the midget submarines that attacked the British fleet at Diego Suarez in Madagascar. She had crossed the Pacific many times. Her commander, Takeuchi Yoshitaka, was experienced, careful, and confident in the security of his codes. His mission on this patrol was not glamour rice. 75-pound rubber bags of rice packed into his torpedo room, destined for the starving Japanese garrison at Buin on the southern tip of Bougainville Island. The Imperial Japanese Army had been bypassed by the American advance months earlier, and the men at Buin were slowly starving. I-16 was to make the delivery, offload her cargo, and turn for home. She never arrived because the message ordering her mission had been decoded, translated, and forwarded to Pacific Fleet headquarters before her rice was even loaded. And on the morning of May 18, 1944, 3 American destroyer escorts, USS England, USS George, and USS Raby, put out from their base and steamed north into the Solomon Sea, hunting a submarine whose exact routing they already knew. The name on the bow of the lead ship was John C. England, and the ocean was about to give up the first of 6 secrets. The Solomon Sea was calm on the afternoon of May 19, 1944. The kind of calm that old sailors distrust. A flat, unbroken blue that stretched to a horizon, so clean it seemed drawn with a ruler. The England cut a white line across it, her diesels running steady, her sonar operator listening to the deep. At 13:41, the operator's voice came through the intercom, quiet and controlled. Sonar contact, bearing steady, steel hull. Below them, at patrol depth, Takeuchi Yoshitaka felt the change in his boat before he heard the report. A submariner knows when he is being hunted. The pings on the hull were faint at first, then closer, then unmistakable. He gave the order to go deep. He turned into the wake of the American ship above him, tucking his hull inside the attacker's turning radius, the oldest trick a submarine commander had. Pendleton attacked. He missed. He came around and attacked again. Missed. A third pass, a miscalculation on depth. Missed a fourth. Takeuchi had anticipated the turn. Missed. 4 attacks, 4 failures. On the bridge of the England, no one spoke. There was only the sound of the ship's own working, the water against her hull, and the quiet murmur of the sonar shack calling out a bearing that would not go away. At 14:33, the 5th salvo left the launcher. 24 bombs arcing forward in that elliptical pattern, dropping into the sea 250 yards ahead of the bow. 4 detonations, then 5, then 6, and then, from somewhere far below, a sound that came up through the water and through the steel of the ship itself. A deep, tearing roar, a secondary explosion so violent that it lifted the stern of the England clear of the ocean and knocked men off their feet across her deck. 20 minutes later, the oil began to surface. Rubber bags of rice, torn open, drifting in a widening slick. By the next morning, that slick measured 3 miles by 6. I-16 was gone. 107 men, a veteran commander, a submarine that had crossed oceans and delivered midget attackers to Diego Suarez 2 years before. All of it ended by a small ship in a small action that no one back home would ever hear about. But on the same day, another message was being decoded in Pearl Harbor. The Imperial Japanese Navy was preparing something called Operation Shin-Eigo, a decisive engagement, a final throw of the dice to reverse the war in the Pacific. And in support of that operation, Vice Admiral Takagi Takeo, commanding the 6th Fleet from his headquarters at Saipan, had stretched a picket line of 7 submarines across the ocean, running from the Caroline Islands northwest toward the Admiralty Islands. The Picket had a code name, NA Line. Its job was to see the American carriers coming, to sound the alarm, to give the combined fleet the warning it needed to spring the trap. The England, the George, and the Raby were ordered north. On May 22nd, at 10 minutes to 4 in the morning, the darkness over the Bismarck Sea was total. USS George's radar picked up a shape on the surface. Small, low, moving slowly, a submarine running on the surface to charge her batteries, believing herself alone. The searchlight came on. The submarine crash-dived. George attacked with Hedgehog and missed. The contact passed to England. At 05:01, on the second attack run, the Hedgehog found its mark. The detonations rolled through the water in that familiar rippling pattern, and then came the sound that Pendleton's sonar cross was learning to recognize. The groaning, splitting song of a pressure hull surrendering to the sea. RO 106. 56 men, gone. 2 submarines in 3 days. On May 23rd, they found RO 104. The Raby attacked. She missed. The George attacked. She missed. Together, over more than 2 hours, in 8 separate Hedgehog runs, 2 American warships put nearly 200 bombs into the water and killed nothing. The submarine was still down there, still alive, still maneuvering. At 08:34, Pendleton took England in. 10 detonations, 12, and then again that terrible tearing sound from below. RO 104, 51 men, gone. 3 submarines in 4 days. At Saipan, in Takagi's headquarters, the reports were coming in wrong. Or, rather, they were not coming in at all. His submarines were sending their routine position updates, and then the transmissions were stopping. First one boat, then a second, then a third. The picket line was bleeding out from its southern end, and Takagi could not understand why. He suspected the codes. He suspected treachery. He suspected everything except the simple, unbearable truth that a single American destroyer escort, one ship, one crew, was walking the length of his picket line and killing his submarines one at a time. On May 24th, at 14 minutes past 2 in the morning, England's Hedgehog fired again. No secondary explosion this time. Only 3 or 5 sharp detonations, and then silence. And then, as the sun came up over the Bismarck Sea, an oil slick spreading slowly across the water. RO 116, 56 men, gone. 4 submarines in 5 days. On the England, something had changed. The crew moved through the attack sequence now, without hesitation, without wasted motion. Sonar to fire control to launcher to reload. A rhythm so tight it barely seemed like human beings doing the work. Lieutenant Williamson would write months later that personnel and equipment were operating with the smoothness of well-oiled clockwork. It was not a boast. It was a description of what months of Pendleton's drilling had produced. They had become an instrument, and the instrument did not tire. On May 26th, they found RO 108. The George attacked and missed. The Raby attacked and missed. And then, as had become the pattern that no one aboard would name out loud because to name it was somehow to jinx it, England came in and took the shot. Second salvo. A single, enormous underwater explosion. The submarine's own torpedoes had cooked off inside her when the Hedgehog cracked her open. RO 108, 61 men, gone, 5 submarines in 7 days. At 6th Fleet headquarters on Saipan, Takagi's intelligence officers were now intercepting American radio traffic. And the traffic, they reported, was becoming increasingly jubilant. Someone in the Pacific was celebrating. A warning went out to every remaining submarine in the operational area. Break routine, change position, assume the codes are compromised, but they could not confirm it. They could not prove it. And the assumption they finally settled on, after long meetings in Takagi's cramped headquarters, was that the Americans had somehow broken part of the naval cipher. Not all of it, just enough. They would keep sending their submarines. They would trust the codes for the truly important messages. They had no other choice. They did not know that FRUPAC had broken all of it. Every message, every routing order, every position report. The men in that basement beneath Pearl Harbor were reading the 6th Fleet's mail the same day it was written. And there was one thing more, a detail that would have felt, to any man who understood it, unbearably cruel. I-16, the first kill, the veteran, the boat that had launched midget submarines against the British anchorage at Diego Suarez in 1942, had been sunk on a rice run, a supply mission. She had spent 9 war patrols hunting American ships across the Pacific, and she had died carrying rubber bags of grain to a starving garrison she would never reach. The rice had floated to the surface after her. The Americans had noted it in their reports and moved on. Now, on the last day of May, the picket line had one boat left. Her name was RO 105. Her commander was a veteran. In August of 1943, she had evaded 2 torpedoes from USS Tarpon and lived to dive another day. In September, she had fired at the light cruiser USS Columbia and missed and escaped. She had rescued downed Japanese aviators. She had crossed and recrossed the Pacific. She was the kind of boat that survived. The hunter-killer group closed on her position on the night of May 30th, and on the bridge of the England, Pendleton was told to stand down. Because the commander of the group, Captain Hamilton Haynes, had been watching what was happening to his little task force, and he had begun to feel the awkwardness of it. The England had 5 kills, the George and the Raby, both armed with the same Hedgehog, both crewed by capable American sailors, had none, 0, between them. Haynes was not a jealous man, but he had 2 other captains whose careers, whose ships, whose crews needed at least 1 submarine to their names. He gave the order. George would attack first. Raby would attack second. The England would wait her turn. The hunter-killer group settled over RO 105 and began their work. And in the darkness beneath them, a veteran Japanese submariner began, for the last time in his life, to maneuver. RO 105 went deep and stayed deep. Her commander had been in this ocean too long to panic. He had heard the pings on his hull before. He had run from American destroyers into Solomons and lived. He knew the geometry of a Hedgehog attack, and he knew the blind zones, and he knew that if he kept his boat quiet and kept his turns tight and kept his depth changing, the Americans above him would eventually run out of patience, or fuel, or luck. He did not know that the ship most likely to kill him had been ordered to hold her fire. George attacked first. She missed. Raby attacked. She missed. George came around and attacked again. Missed. Raby made another run. Missed. The hours stretched. The sun came up over the Bismarck Sea on the morning of May 31st, 1944, and the 2 American destroyer escorts kept pounding the water above RO 105, and RO 105 kept sliding through the blind zones, and nothing died. 6 Hedgehog attacks between them. Not a single hit. On the bridge of the England, Pendleton waited. He did not press the radio. He did not question the order. He had been a Navy officer long enough to understand what Haynes was trying to do, and he respected it. His crew stood at their stations, listening to the reports, watching the water, saying nothing. At last, from Haynes' flagship, the transmission came. Short, clipped, honest to the point of bluntness. Oh, hell. Go ahead, England. 6 words. The whole story of that operation, compressed into 6 words. Pendleton acknowledged. The England moved in. Her sonar crew, the same men who had killed 5 submarines in less than 2 weeks, took the bearing. Fire control set the solution. The Hedgehog crew stood ready at the launcher. At 07:36 in the morning, the salvo left the bow. 24 bombs arcing forward, dropping into the sea 250 yards ahead. At 07:41, 5 minutes later, a single enormous underwater explosion erupted beneath the surface. Oil fountained upward, debris followed, and then the ocean settled and RO-105 was gone. 6 submarines in 12 days. That was the number. That was what one small destroyer Escort, 186 men, one weapon developed by British engineers in a Royal Navy design office guided by intelligence from a basement beneath Pearl Harbor, had accomplished in less than a fortnight of continuous operations. A record that would never be broken, not by any ship, not in any ocean, not in any war. The England received a Presidential Unit Citation. Pendleton received the Navy Cross, and Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a signal that entered the folklore of the United States Navy. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. To understand what that record meant, you have to compare it to the only thing that came close. In the North Atlantic, the British 2nd Escort Group, commanded by Captain Frederick John Walker aboard the sloop HMS Starling, had waged the most successful anti-submarine campaign of the entire war against German U-boats. Starling herself was credited with 14 kills across the whole conflict. 14 U-boats across years, across dozens of operations involving multiple ships and hundreds of men. The England had sunk 6 in 12 days, alone, but there was something larger than the record itself, something the men aboard the England did not know at the time and would not fully understand until the war was over and the archives of the Imperial Japanese Navy were opened. The 7 submarines of Takagi's NA line had not been ordinary patrol boats. They had been the eyes of the combined fleet. Their mission was to see the American carriers coming, to sound the alarm, to give Admiral Ozawa Jisaburo, commanding the mobile fleet, the warning he needed to launch his aircraft at maximum range and destroy the American task forces before they could strike back. The England had killed 6 of those 7 boats. On June 19, 1944, less than 3 weeks after RO-105 went down, Ozawa's carriers steamed east into the Philippine Sea. They launched their aircraft against Task Force 58 under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, and they did so without warning, without reconnaissance, without any idea of what they were flying into. The result entered history under a name American pilots gave it that same day: the Marianas Turkey Shoot. By the end of June 20th, the Japanese Naval Air Arm had ceased to exist as a fighting force. 3 fleet carriers were on the bottom, including the Taiho and the Shokaku. Nearly 600 aircraft were destroyed. The pilots who died that day were the last generation of trained naval aviators the Empire of Japan would ever produce. There would be no replacements. There would be no recovery. From that point forward, Japanese carriers would sail to their deaths without air groups, and the Pacific War became a matter of arithmetic. The straight line ran from Pearl Harbor to the Philippine Sea. It ran through a young ensign from Oklahoma who died on a capsizing battleship on the morning of December 7th, 1941. It ran through the ship that carried his name. It ran through Pendleton and Williamson and the sonar operators and the Hedgehog crews who trained until their work became reflex. It ran through the cryptanalysts of FRUPAC who read the enemy's mail. It ran through 12 days in May of 1944 when 6 Japanese submarines vanished beneath the Bismarck Sea and took the eyes of the combined fleet with them. The England herself did not survive the war. On May 9th, 1945, off Okinawa, 3 Japanese kamikaze aircraft came in, low over the water toward her. Her guns shot one down. The second veered off. The third came straight in, and it hit her. 37 men died in that impact, and the fires that followed. 25 more were wounded. The same crew that had hunted submarines with the precision of a watchmaker now fought for their own ship with hoses and axes and everything they had. They saved her. She was towed for repairs, but the damage was too heavy for the little destroyer Escort to return to the war before it ended. She was decommissioned in October of 1945. She was sold for scrap in 1946. The steel that had killed 6 submarines in 12 days went into razor blades and automobile frames and washing machines in the post-war years, and nothing was left of her but a name. But the Navy kept its promise. In 1960, a guided missile frigate designated DLG-22 was commissioned into the United States Navy, later reclassified as CG-22. Her name was USS England. She served through the Cold War and into a world Ensign John C. England had never seen. She was decommissioned in 1994, but the name remained on the rolls. The Navy kept its word. There is one detail that closes this story, and no historian could have arranged it more perfectly if he had written it as fiction. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Ensign John C. England died because the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier fleet had struck Pearl Harbor by surprise. That surprise had been made possible by a reconnaissance and communications network stretching across the Pacific, a network of submarines and codes and picket lines that gave the Japanese carriers their window of attack. 3 years later, a small ship bearing his name went out into the Pacific and systematically dismantled that same network. Submarine by submarine, kill by kill, until nothing was left of it. And when the Japanese carriers sailed for their decisive battle, sailed east toward the Marianas, expecting to spring their trap, they sailed blind, because the eyes that were supposed to watch for them had been closed forever. In 12 days in May of 1944, by a ship whose name was a debt owed to a young man who had died on a burning battleship in Pearl Harbor. The debt was paid in full. The ocean, in the end, keeps very few secrets, and the ones it keeps only for a little while.